So, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me for this important event. You know that when we speak about the pandemic, nowadays that, the disease is less severe, we say, okay, we have now to prepare to the next wave or to the next pandemic. And I'm sure that the key players for the next pandemic, this will be you. And that's why I think it's important to share with you some of the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. May I have the first slide, please? So the first lesson, as you will see, is that solidarity is key to fight infectious threats. This is not a new lesson, as you can hear on this slide. This is a quote from a Nobel Prize laureate, which is less known than Louis Pasteur, but he made significant contribution in the field of infectious disease. And the point here is to demonstrate that indeed facing those infectious threats, we are all brothers. We are all brothers because we are facing the same danger, the virus. And also we are brothers because we transmit the microbe, the virus, between ourselves. So we need to work together to make this better. Now, solidarity is also very important across the world. Next slide, please. Indeed, and this is a slide which I borrow from the Oxfam organization. It's clear that the virus actually enhanced a number of inequalities, and this is described on this slide. Perhaps I will just emphasize 2 points. First, inequalities between rich and poor countries. And second, there are also gender inequalities. There are a number of data showing that, all in all, women were more victims of the pandemic than males. Next slide, please. Now, the second lesson, which is really critical for people like you, for medical students, is that medical innovation saves lives. And there have been a number of discussions about, how many lives were saved with these new vaccines. This is an estimation done by the journal The Economist. And as you will see, and as you will read, we can estimate that about 20 million of lives were saved across the world by the use of these new generation vaccines. And as you can see, most of those lives were really directly saved by the vaccine. You can also calculate the number of lives which were indirectly saved. Now, how was this possible? Next slide, please. It was possible because, as you know, an unprecedented effort of researchers, of scientists, both in universities and academic institutions, but also in industry, in the pharma industry and in biotech, very important, as you know, especially in Europe. You all heard about the BioNTech in Germany. And through this unique collaboration of all key players in vaccinology, it was possible indeed to bring these vaccines in a bit less than a year. And I will not elaborate on the different steps which were necessary, but I would like perhaps to emphasize that the starting point was the release by Chinese scientists of the full genome of the SARS-CoV-2 virus causing COVID-19. And it's because they released this openly, very rapidly, this was in December 2019, that in several labs, it was possible to start knowing this sequence to prepare those mRNA vaccines as well as other vaccines, the based on adenoviral vectors. And as you can see, very rapidly, the different trials were conducted. And at the end of this process, obviously, you must have the approval by the regulatory authorities, which mean the Food and Drug Administration in the US, and which means the European Medicine Agency in Europe. No, those agencies are there, and I insist on this, to make sure that those new products, those new vaccines are safe. And some people question the fact that safety was regularly assessed. I can tell you that it was assessed exactly the same way as for other vaccine, but in much more rapid manner, and we can come back to that in the discussion if you wish. Next slide, please. Now, very often people say, okay, but this is a completely new technology. How is it that it was possible? Are we really sure that, it will not have which type of drawbacks that we will know? I think it's important as medical student that you know the history of mRNA vaccine. And as you know, as you see here, it's already a long history. And actually, it's more than 10 years that human beings receive mRNA vaccine in the context of experimental studies. And obviously, the knowledge about this vaccine was already there when, again, the sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus was published. And you see here the different steps which were necessary to make these mRNA vaccines efficient product. I will not go into details. I will just mention one important thing. Many people focus on mRNA, on the genetic material contained in this vaccine. I think it's important to realize that a key component are the nanoparticles which contain the mRNA. Those nanoparticles are really critical to induce the protective effect. Now, I will not talk about the other vaccines, which prove to be quite efficient based on adenoviral vector and which originate in Oxford University. Next slide, please. Now, lesson 3, which is also very important for you as medical student. Just think about what really causes a disease and what will determine the expression of the disease. Obviously, you can say for infectious disease, it's rather easy. You have a microbe, which is the cause of the disease, in this case, a virus. However, the disease which will develop as a consequence of this microbe, of this virus, might differ according to a number of parameters. And I would like to insist on some of those parameters, or genetic makeup. And it was through a unique collaboration through a number of academic institutions across the world that it was possible to identify that some genes, which for those who know the interferon system, code for proteins in this system, are critical to protect, but also to make some people, even young people, prone to the disease. Now, the other important element, as you know, is age, is the other disease which can promote severity of COVID-19. I would like also to insist on the environment. And the environment will act, actually, at least indirectly, on the genome. Next slide, please. And this is just the slide showing this unique collaborative effort by this human COVID-19 consortium. Look at the paper in Science. I think there are more than 70 authors. So this demonstrates to you the importance to be open to collaboration to have a real impact. Next slide, please. And for those who are following the biomedical science, you know that our genome, or genes, are controlled, at least the way genes are expressed, are controlled by so-called epigenetic mechanisms. Those are mechanisms which will indeed result either in expression or silencing of genes. And they seem to be, as you can see on this slide, they seem to be important and to play important role in the COVID-19 disease. Next slide, please. And one of the mechanisms by which epigenetic is involved and actually modify gene expression is indeed our environment. This is a very important study conducted in Italy. You remember that the COVID-19 pandemic really, at least in Europe, started in a way there in Lombardia. It was extremely severe. And one of the reasons seems to be the air pollution in this region, as you will be able to read in this particular study. Next slide, please. Now, on the slide where I indicate the different factors which govern disease expression, there was also indicate our microbiome, or gut microbiota, which means, as you know, the microbe, the bacteria that are present in our gut. And actually, the severity of COVID-19 is influenced by the type of microbes that we have in our gut, as shown in this study. Next slide. So those are lessons from the pandemic. But my point is that now we have really to extend those lessons to other areas of medicine. Let's talk about epigenetics. This paper is an important one, which was authored by Edith Hurt from the important molecular biology lab in Heidelberg. And it shows that indeed our genes, the expression of our genes, is modified as we become older. And as you can see here, for example, looking at DNA methylation, which is a parameter looking at epigenetic changes, these dramatically increase over time as we age, and these are certainly a very important influence explaining, for example, the increased incidence of cancers in old people. Next slide, please. Also, to extrapolate to other diseases, this is just a slide showing the major causes of death overall across the world. And again, you see here that pollution is critical. And as you know, pollution, and we will come back to this in a moment, is very much linked to climate change. And again, I think that your generation has a very important role to play in, making sure that, we indeed change the way we consider the importance of the quality of air and water. You see that tobacco smoking is also a very important cause of death worldwide. And again, this is something on which we can work. You see also alcohol. Next slide, please. Now, this is just to make the link between climate change and indeed health and human health. I will not go into too many details, but in this New England Journal of Medicine paper, you will see the different mechanisms by which global warming will influence, is already influenced actually, our health. I will just give you perhaps one example, which is the fact that with global warming, we have mosquitoes which become more prevalent in our countries. And for example, a disease like dengue, but also Zika and chikungunya, will become more prevalent in our European countries as they become warmer. Next slide, please. Regarding the importance of the gut microbiome, you have to know that the microbes that we have in our body will indeed, or might indeed, favor a number of diseases. I will just emphasize here the link with diabetes, which is at least in part related with the link with obesity. And this has already consequences in terms of development of new therapeutic solutions. Next slide. As you will see, there is already a product which is now on the market, which actually was developed here in Brussels by the group of Patrice Cany at the Université Catholique de Louvain, showing that, you know, these bacteria Akkermansia can indeed improve the situation of people with obesity and diabetes. Next slide, please. Now, the fourth lesson is indeed the role of artificial intelligence, first in tackling the pandemic. As you know, during the pandemic, we were confined and we had to stay home, the doctors the same. So telemedicine developed, so digital medicine, telemedicine, and also big data, data science become important to develop epidemiological model to start to predict the next wave of the pandemic. But the other point that I would like to make here regarding artificial intelligence, because this is less known, is the fact that there is at least one product which is on the market for patients in hospital with severe COVID-19 disease. The name is baricitinib. This drug was discovered through artificial intelligence by screening large banks of chemicals. This drug was found to be extremely efficient against the virus. Next slide, please. Now, artificial intelligence, digital medicine also in a way empower patients. You know that I'm sure that many of you or most of you have watches which can record, you know, a number of health parameters. This was developing during the pandemic with people measuring their oxygen saturation, other parameters. So this is an ongoing revolution. The patient, him or herself, will become very important in managing health and in transmitting key data to doctors. Yes, next slide, please. So the final lesson that I would like to comment before I hope we enter in an interesting discussion is the importance of health literacy. You know that it's not sufficient to have efficient innovation, to have, you know, these new vaccines which are efficient and safe, but we need those vaccines to reach the citizens, to reach the people. And we already alluded to the problem related to the insufficient access to poor countries, but there is another limitation, which is the so-called vaccine hesitancy. The fact that some people lose trust in medicine, lose trust in pharmaceutical product, and as you know, there are movements which indeed argue against the use of vaccine. And this is certainly a factor which limits the way we can protect our population. This is important for COVID-19, but again, even more important for other diseases. And you might have heard that disease that in a way we forgot in our country, such as poliomyelitis or measles, now start to reappear because vaccination against those diseases was much less efficient during the pandemic for a number of reasons. So we have educate people, and our view is that education starts early. The idea is that each citizen is indeed informed and educated about how to take care of his or her own health, and is informed about how to look at the new information which appear in the literature, in the media, about new products, so that they can really judge what the usefulness of new products. And obviously, this is not a problem for you, because most of you, I guess, are medical students. But I think it's important that everyone indeed got this sufficient information. Next slide. In our view, and this is, I would say, my main activities nowadays, we think that this starts very early on. And indeed, I spend quite a bit of time promoting this e-book, which is in open access on the internet, which has been designed for children between 11 and 13 years old of age. And those papers actually have been reviewed by children to make sure that they are intelligible as much as possible. And as I said, I spend most of my time nowadays in school explaining, you know, the content of this book and discussing with the children, answering their questions, as I hope I will do in a moment with you. Next slide. So I will end my presentation here and would be happy to take any questions and answer any remarks you may have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now, let's sit together so that we can actually tackle the questions of the attendees, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, we just had the conference 5 Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic with Professor Goldman. And I hope that given your curious people might have some questions around. So if any one of you have a question, please raise your hand. We're going to give you a microphone. Please just state your name and your question.
My name is Grace, and I would like to ask if you could briefly explain why the countries with the lowest air pollution had the worst outcome in COVID.
So thank you for your question. The answer is rather simple. As you know, the virus is entering our body through our airways. So if it stays around the nose and the pharynx, well, I mean, you have like a flu, but no more than this. And this is the situation actually in most children, as you know. Now, if your immune defenses are such that they don't eliminate the virus when it's in your upper airways, it will enter the lower airways and they will enter the lungs. And it's there that the major problem arises. The major cause of death and problem related to COVID-19 is really lung pneumonia together with clotting problem. Usually both are linked. And we know that air pollution is a very important determinant of lung disorders. So it means that if your lung is already affected by air pollution, when the virus comes in, it will induce more damages because there are pre-existing damage, and the virus will just exacerbate those damages.
So you were mentioning also the link between a clean air and the worst. That's it. So she was asking that some of the countries that have the cleanest air also have the highest rate of people having COVID. That's what you said, right? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, as I tried to explain, the determinants of COVID-19 severity are multiple. So even if you have a perfect clean air in an environment, for example, where there is no access or people don't use vaccine, to give this example, or we know that in country where the economic situation, as I said, is bad for a number of reasons, less access to health systems, these are other very important causes of severity. So obviously, what I said about air pollution is one determinant, but as I tried to explain, there are many others which made things complicated. And this gives me the opportunity to tell you that here artificial intelligence now is used to try to integrate all the risk factors and to be able to identify what is the risk for a given population or for a given individual.
Many parameters. It's more complicated than just clean air, I guess. Thank you for your question, Grace. Anybody else, please raise your hand. So one, and then gentleman here.
Hello, my name is Stephanie, and I wanted to ask about, we talked about the inequality that we saw socially during the COVID crisis, and I wanted to know, as general practitioners, what could be our impact or our role to help reduce those inequalities?
So thank you for this question. It will give me the opportunity to emphasize how I foresee the role of the doctors in the future, because from what I said, you can think, okay, the patient will record these parameters, it will enter in a machine with artificial intelligence, and perhaps the machine will do the prescription of the right treatment. This is now, it will work, because there are a number of parameters to be considered that AI cannot take into consideration. Those are the patient preferences. So, for example, and I think the role of the GP is really to help the patient to navigate in this complex world, to discuss with the patient what does he or she prefer. Also to discuss with the patient how to protect himself, but also the relatives. Just think about grandfathers or grandmother in the environment. And I think that the role of the GP is also to indeed restore or to ensure trust in what is proposed. I think that people will obviously be more confident to listen to a GP that they know for some time, that what they hear at the TV from a minister or a public health authority. So I really think that the GP has a key role to play.
Yeah, so the human factor is really important in the job you're going to do, because even though the technology is getting better and better, you will always be the link between the patient and the technology. Technology itself is not sufficient.
Exactly.
Yes, and to add on that, like if our patients are facing social difficulties, like what can we actually do to help them? Is it more like the government action and we don't really have power over that? Because we talked, for example, how the richer were getting richer, the poorer during the pandemic. So as practitioner, it's not really in our field of action to be able to help with that.
Well, you know, obviously as general practitioner, your impact is not wide, it's not easy. But I think that what we need, and just remember the HIV pandemic, which was also a pandemic, we tend to forget this. Advocacy has been key. So I think that we need advocacy from the patient, from the citizens, and also from the people who are in daily contact with the citizens and the patient, which means the general practitioners. It's not easy because, especially nowadays that the pandemic is more or less under control, although the virus is still actively circulating, those who should do advocacy are the most vulnerable people, which means people, very old people or people with diseases, and those people have other things to think about than just making advocacy. Though it's there that indeed, and also students, and that's why I mentioned climate change, because young people are very concerned about climate. They should understand that climate, health, really go hand in hand.
Thank you.
So the last two questions.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Speak loudly in the mic.
My name is Radi. I just had another question concerning the fact that doctors were mediatized during the pandemic. We saw many doctors on televisions, and the fact that there were politicians and doctors that were talking, and the fact that also medicine evolves while we know new things. There were a lot of changing point of views concerning masks, vaccines, even confinement. So do you think that this had an impact on the confidence that you talked about to take the vaccine from the people afterwards? And what do you think we should do in the next pandemic concerning this issue?
No, you're fully right. I think what you just described was a major cause of distrust. And I mean, there are several reasons. I think that the fact that there are different opinions, this is not surprising, and this should be part of what I call health literacy. People should understand that uncertainties, this is part of medical science, and that's why also medicine is still an art. So, and there are unavoidable uncertainties. And this is something which is difficult to accept when you are confronted, you know, with such a threat as the virus. But this is something that you have to learn earlier in your life. This is part of health literacy. So that's one part of the answer. The other, and I would say that, you know, some doctors, some scientists, and we have several examples, I think in a way, because they had to provide short answer on the media, they don't give a full picture of the knowledge. And obviously, if one doctor picks part of the knowledge, another picks another part, then people become confused. And on the top of it, if you have politicians which speak as they were doctors, this is what you have to do, this is the vaccine you have to take. I mean, this is not their job. It's your job, it's the job of the doctor. So you are right, this is a cause of distrust, and it's not easy to do something about it. I think that, again, people like you should explain, a bit like I'm trying to do. I mean, you should be the ambassadors to the public to explain this situation.
So one of the main questions would be, has social networks made your work harder?
Well, for sure, because, again, people do not have the capacity to make the distinction between everything that they read on social networks. So, you know, social networks are there, they are there to develop further. So, and I'm not, you know, thinking that just to forbid some of this information. I don't think this is the right way to go. I think that the right way to go is that indeed people have, you know, a mindset that they are critical from what they read and that they can make a distinction between what seems true and what is not.
Education first. Last question. Anyone?
There are two or three.
Hi, thank you for your lecture. My name is Alex, and you were talking about education, and I have a question about education for the civilians, for our future patients. Can we do something to educate patients about future pandemic? We don't know what it will be, but if something can be done for like prophylaxis to make trust of the patients more for the doctors, because pandemic can come in any time. Thank you.
That's another very good question. Thank you very much. First, I would like to mention here that we are talking about patients, but we should more talk about citizens. We have to prepare the citizens. And indeed, it's a question to explain how those pandemics come. We know that those viruses, those microbes come from the animal world. So, and we know that some of them, like the coronavirus, it comes with through the airways, as I said. So I think that to educate people about, you know, the need to wear masks in certain conditions, in being careful in certain environment is important. And, you know, you say future pandemics, but just think about the flu. You know, I'm more afraid as we speak of what will happen with flu in coming months than what will happen with COVID-19 for a number of reasons. And I think that when you have flu, it's very important that you think that you should not contaminate, you know, people around you, that, you know, masks are also very useful against flu and things like that. So I think that the way to do is not only to discuss about future pandemic. People don't, it's true what you said, but people don't want to hear that, you know, there will be a next one. But flu, this they know. And, you know, by helping people to be more careful regarding flu, you will already do something important for future pandemics.
So teaching behaviors when it comes to handling existing diseases, but isn't like the main goal that could maybe not eradicate, but lessen the effect of these kind of disease is like eating better, getting a better environment, you know, getting a better environment around us. That should maybe be like the ultimate goal in order to protect the body of the people.
You are fully right. I cannot say it better than you just did.
One last question. Anybody here?
Hello, my name is Ayasaya. So I have a question because I meet a lot of people that are anti-vax, like don't want to get vaccinated. And I have some kind of advices to give them, but I want to know what is your most effective advice to give them with the COVID pandemic, like with the COVID vaccine, because we know that for the other vaccines, we have some long approach by their effects with the years, people have good health and stuff, they don't have a reactivation of the diseases. But with the COVID vaccine, since we don't have a long perspective or studies for the moment, so what is your most effective advice according to that? Thank you.
So another very important question. It's my experience that unfortunately when we have, someone who is, anti-vax activist, you will lose your time in discussing. It's sad. It doesn't mean that you should not respect this person. This is what I told them, I respect. But when they reach this level, okay, there is not, you will never convince such people. So what you have to do is to prevent those people, to disseminate this false information. And for this, the two things which are key is transparency, acknowledging the uncertainties, and that's important, and I can tell you two things around this. Those vaccines are extremely efficient to protect against severe disease. Everyone fully vaccinated, and you have to repeat the booster and so on, you are very well protected against, going to the hospital or dying. That's a reality, and you saw the numbers. What is also a reality, and we should acknowledge this, and this is what people realize, is that those vaccines do not prevent viruses to circulate and to be transmitted from one person to the other. They have some effect, but it's a weak effect. And this is something that we should acknowledge and explain, that research is still ongoing to improve this situation so that we reach a situation like the one we have with measles or even with flu, where we have a better effect on the transmission. And that's important. Regarding safety, which is very often, at the top of the arguments of anti-vax, we should explain that we did everything we could, as we did with other vaccine, to prevent side effects. But still, when you vaccinate 100 million people, you cannot exclude that you will have unexpected, very rare side effects. And you should acknowledge those uncertainties and explain that there are scientific work which is done to understand this and to try, even if it's very rare. So in terms of public health, people can say, okay, that's not very important, but for people themselves, it is. And I think that it's something that should also be explained.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the intervention of Professor Goldman. Big round of applause. Thank you so much, Professor Goldman.
Thank you to you.